Coogs House, the Houston Cougars fall to San Diego State 73-70 in overtime. And it's starting to get to the point where I think some of us might be getting rightfully concerned.
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs, a podcast about your Houston Cougars. Happy post-Thanksgiving break. I'm your host of Locked On Cougs, Parker Ainsworth, here to break down all things Cougs. If you're a hater, just a fan, or a hater, just a fan, can't step by, I got all mixed up. Whatever you are, tell me in the comments down below how you're feeling after watching that ugly basketball game. Houston falls to San Diego State 73-70 in overtime. I believe that's their third loss in 6 games, which is not something we're used to saying about this Houston Cougar men's basketball program. Certainly not for a long time. And I want to talk about this one in a number of different ways in tonight's episode, brought to you by Game Time Live Breakdown. But I also want to just first take a second to react. I do want to talk about rotations and offensive stuff and like some where do we go from here kind of things. I don't tend to think the sky is falling when you lose games in November. But there are clearly gaps and holes being exploited that need to be shown if this team wants to get to where we think their potential lies. So first and foremost, let's react a little bit. I have to say, first reaction, first thoughts on my end were, you're not going to get many games to get 2 guys over 20 points. And so that's going to make it tough where both Cryer and Sharp get 21 and 23 apiece. The truth was they had trouble finding any help on the offense side of the basketball. My natural reaction is to go to then as a coach, I go to like the point guard supposed to be steering the ship and finding things. Obviously, had the best player in America last year in Jamal Shed playing that position. For all of Milos' strengths, he is not Jamal Shed, right? And so that's the way things go. They are still clearly finding how to match up that replacement, because as much as you can replace a point guard, you can't replace Jamal. He's like been the culture of the program, doing everything they asked him to do for the last 4 seasons. I see several people commenting here in the comments. I'm going to read some of these out loud as well. Longtime listener Adrian said unable to put teams away is a problem. Agreed. They were up late in this game. That's not great. Adrian also adds, was it me or did Howard look lost on defense down the stretch? Howard, I'm not sure who we're talking about there, but I thought there were several guys on defense for Houston that didn't look like themselves maybe down the stretch. This team is not done, Ronald Brown. It's still November. Does not look like Houston, though, your second comment, so I'd agree with that one. Does not look like the Houston we're used to. Gary asked for a 7-footer. I hate to break it to you, Pards. So does like everyone in college basketball, and they're not adding to the roster mid-season. Alan Snyder says, I don't know if this is a top five team talent-wise. I was coaching execution or bad game script. I think that if you ask Sampson and the guys, they'd probably all share some of this. I don't think anyone's going to take any one part of that. But I think Alan's good to point out that that's probably some combination of all of this. Steve says that I keep telling myself whatever happens in football today, at least I have basketball is still true, but not as much as we were hoping. We will talk about basketball today in this episode and football in a separate episode after that one wraps up, which I'm sure will be technically in the wee hours of tomorrow morning. But yeah, I feel the same way. Lots here. They'll straighten up, says Joe Mendez. Straighten all out before any conference play starts. Go Cougs. I think that's fair. I think that's why you play these games. And Malik should never play over Miller ever again. I think we'll talk about this in the second segment. We look at rotations in the lineup and stuff like that. And then Michael Jones says the definition of insanity is clearly 3 against 5. Well, that's probably because of how the offense looked at times. As you look across this board, I think everyone's kind of hitting on some of the same things, and that is that this team lacks offensive identity. They can find defensive identity and spurts through Roberts or Tugler or whomever. But on offense, they aren't really able to find that like thing they hang their hat on. I joke about in football how you have to have like some play that you like feel good enough at, like unless some football play where you're like, I'm going to get 2.5 or 3 yards every single time we run this play. Or if it's a pass, I'm going to get 6 yards every single time we complete this ball or whatever. They don't really have that set on offense. They're in a lot more floppy set tonight What that is, it's a large like baseline set where the guys on the wings kind of trade sides along the posts, and they enter the ball to the wing, and then they can do different actions and handoffs to the high post after that. They did a lot of that tonight. They hadn't done that as much against Notre Dame or Alabama, so I think that's something they kind of like out of what they get so far. And frankly, I feel like what you saw out of that was that's why you saw a lot more isolation type of buckets out of Sharp and Cryer. They're kind of the two guys that run off of those kinds of things. What I think you saw is at different points, though, our big guys down low had trouble finding offense. Francis had just 5 points. Roberts had just 4 points. Jojo Tugler had just 2 points. Those guys make up too many minutes between the three of them. You pretty much always had 2 of the 3 on the floor to come away with just 11 points from the 3 of those guys. And San Diego State's long. They're are not necessarily what I would call dominant down low. Juwan Roberts played 41 minutes and had just 4 points. It looked like they were kind of shaken up down low. And I don't know if it was because, you think about not getting them the ball early and then get out of the game late or whatever, but like the Jojo Tugler turnover at the end with the travel as he gathers for what should have been an easy, pushback layup kind of thing, or Roberts finishing, barely getting off the ground for a left-handed hook at the rim, getting swatted. Those kinds of things are, I think, a little eye-opening and eye-opening. I don't, anyway, because they don't feel normal to this group. The bigs have kind of been at least a reliable between the 3 of them. You're thinking you're getting 16, 18, maybe even 20 points. And the occasional time you get a 20 game out of Roberts or something, right? They don't look like that right now. And that's not good. They need those guys. And frankly, they've also been typically the kind of guys that you don't typically have to draw up extra plays for. They typically get putbacks and things like that. For whatever reason, tonight, the offensive rebounds were leading to other baskets for Houston. Houston had a lot of their points on second chances, but it wasn't coming from easy putbacks from the guys down low. It was frankly really hard baskets. And they're still finding that identity offensively. Again, they lost the best player in America Again, he didn't win the award, but Jamal Shedd was the best player in the Big 12. He was in the running for best player and multiple National Player of the Year awards. They lost a big piece of this, and so figuring how to put the pieces together around it. That being said, I do feel like there are moments where this team looks hurried or rushed, and that's probably why a coach would say you play these games in November, right? They've had a really tough November as far as scheduling goes since Sampson's been here. And I don't mean to point the finger and say, this is what you guys wanted, because I think there are people that would say that. But when you say you want to play a bunch of tournament caliber games in November to get yourself ready, this is kind of what that looks like. And unfortunately, without Uno down there or on the floor out there to set them all up, they're kind of looking a little ragdollish. More comments flying in here. Michael Jones says the big men have regressed. I certainly think they looked worse tonight. I don't know that I would say that across the entire Players Era tournament. I have to think on that more, but certainly did not look worse tonight. Till the offense, Coogs can get some offense for the bigs. They'll continue to have issues, quality teams. You look across the board, and I think one thing that H-Town Big Dobbs has there that's correct is that across the board, top-end teams in America typically have a lot more even scoring than Houston had tonight. Again, I don't want to indict their entire season down to what tonight looked like, but it looked simple, simple in that basically Houston could only get offense out of 2 guys, and that's not great. Joe Mendez says something about Mercy Miller. We'll tie that into the next segment in a second. Uzan's not played well this season. What's funny is I thought he played really well when he was on the floor against Auburn, but he was foul trouble that game, foul trouble Alabama game. In this game, he had how many turnovers? 3 turnovers, and he again fouled out of this game. I don't even guess I could like click to that. It was so late when it happened. And then he had his 10 points. Wow. So, Milos has not looked the part yet. It's probably the most important position on the floor. I spoke about after the Alabama game about do you have to manage his matchups differently and maybe put him on less threatening guys to score and have him as a no switch kind of guy, just because you got to have him out there running some sort of an offense. But then tonight he played 36 minutes and it didn't seem to matter a whole lot. So anyway, we'll talk more about that. We're already got guys talking here about getting into rotation, stuff like that. So I want to get into that in the second segment. And it sounds like y'all are already there with me. But I should remind you that tonight's show is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. So if you want to get on the NFL action with FanDuel, right now, new customer can get $5, can bet $5 and win $150 back in bonus bets if it hits. FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on NFL games all in one place. You get a hunch in the middle of a game. You can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page that you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com. Join today. You get start with $150 back in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch. Make everyone more with FanDuel, the sportsbook partner of the NFL. Parker Ainsworth locked on Coogs. You're trying to break down or make sense, I should say, of Houston's loss to San Diego State 73-70 in overtime. And people have talked some about rotations. Keenan here points out Coach has to switch up the rotation. H-Town Big Dive says we need to stop talking about the Cougs depth. When Sampson talks about I was only going to play 6 or 7 guys against quality teams. Uzan has not played well this season at all, says Mr. Texco. Joe Mendez asked about Mercy Miller playing. And here's a couple things I will say. So in this game, 7 guys played 20 or more minutes, and Arceneaux being one of those that hit 21, and that seems to be what his unspoken officially limit is, right? Because after 21 minutes, I don't know we've seen him play a whole lot more than that yet this season. Malik Wilson played on the books here. It has just 4 minutes. That seems low, and they've said a lot in for a minute. I think that was basically because he stepped on the floor for a defensive possession in overtime. Maybe it was at the end of regulation. Either way. Across the board here, as I look at this, Houston's really playing 7 guys. One of those guys is coming off of an Achilles tear and still not playing more than 20 minutes. And the other guy is coming off of fractures in his foot. That's bad. And I am big on it. I see someone in here, I can't find the comment right now. Someone had commented that Sampson's got to get over the playing freshman thing. What's funny is I would say 2 years ago, right, we had Jarris was a freshman, but Emanuel and Terrance are both freshmen as well. They were kind of, Jarris started, and Emanuel and Terrance are both in the 8-man rotation. And what you looked at then is it kind of felt like Sampson was turning this corner. Then last year, Jojo Tugler was the 6th man as a freshman. This year, we're still seeing, Mercy Miller get brought along. And I think the truth is that Mercy Miller is not really a point guard. And so if you're going to put him in as a freshman, the kind of natural fit right now is that, Emanuel Sharp and LJ Cryer are the other 2 guards. Well, they're your 2 sharp scorers, right? And so if you can't get Cryer to really fit in, that's not the best way to put it, but as an offensive point guard, right? A guy that sets everyone else up and doesn't just look for himself. Because right now, LJ Cryer is also kind of a de facto 2 guard, right? Emanuel Sharp is a shooting guard, small forward type of wing scorer, right? Mercy's not, when he's been on the floor, looked like a point guard. He had like a nice pass to set and transition and stuff like that. But on the whole, when he gets the ball in the half court, he's not looking to run offense as much as he's looking to get to the bucket. And while it's a strength of his, I don't think that Mercy's necessarily, unless he changes a lot in the near future, a true backup point guard option. So you're looking like, well, they've run Malik at that spot. He played just 4 minutes. That's not quite the same, thing either. What are they going to do with there? I think as Terrance gets brought on, he can do some more of those kind of duties. I'm surprised how little they've used J1 in that role. And then truthfully, I think they're going to have to find some sets that use Cryer in that spot and take him off of a shooting role as well. They don't have a backup point guard. They haven't had a backup point guard. And to be truthful, when I look across college basketball, there aren't enough point guards for every team to have 2. And when I look at like a team like Auburn has a backup point guard that's a freshman, and that's fair. We saw him firsthand, right? But we look at there aren't any teams that have 2 point guards and one of them is not a freshman, because if you're good enough to play as a backup point guard after your freshman year, you transfer. You don't sit behind anyone, right? Teams that have a backup point guard, typically that backup is a freshman, or the star's a freshman, the backup's a long-time guy, right? And so I look at this roster and think like, okay, where do you fit in? Where do you find more points? Where do you find more offense in the half-court stuff? Who's your point guard? am looking at, do I play Mercy Miller more? He didn't play at all in this game. And do you play Mercy Miller more for this standpoint only? There are so many times where this offense looks stuck in a rut that while he might not be able to play point guard, Mercy Miller can score. And while he might bleed points on defense, Mercy Miller can score. And I have to say that ultimately, as you look at this team, I feel maybe this is the coach in me that has had to plug a lot of holes. My teams are never as talented as Sampson's are, right? So I don't mean to say like everyone's got problems, but do you play Mercy Miller and then find ways to cover up his gaps defensively? Do you play Mercy Miller and then like say, hey, LJ, we're going to have to rotate you through the point guard spot. You don't get to shoot as much when you're the point, right? Like, do you find those kinds of things? Because Mercy can score. Mercy can score at an elite level. And I'm not ready to throw the baby out the bathwater with Milos. I think there's ways to get him coached up on, and get him in less foul trouble and get him less, those kinds of things as well. But you're going to need a backup point guard. You're going to need somebody who can come run offense, and you're also going to you're going to have to find ways to score. They went like 3 minutes in the late part of this. I think it was the last 3 minutes, the second half, without scoring a field goal. They only scored a few points in overtime, and most of those were at the free throw. I mean, they had 70 points tonight, right? 70 points tonight, and then on their offense, their second chance shots I have down here. Where'd my number go? At one point I had 16, so I was trying to make sure I had it right on second chance points. But second chance points, we'll say 18 because it was 16 whenever I last saw it. And then you also had on free throws for your points, I should have looked this up. You had 13 points off of free throws. So what you're really saying there is that between 18 and 13, 31 of your 70 points are coming from not half court or not offense, really, right? That's before you even get to fast break offense. Houston had 18. They had points in paint. They had no fast break points. And that's probably because they couldn't turn San Diego State over enough. And ultimately, this is a lot of lacking in 0 points in fast break doesn't feel right. But anyway, a lack of half court offense. I've got more comments flying in. Mr. Will says this team is overrated because he thinks the sky is falling, apparently. Can't shoot, can't go in the valley, no point guard. Front court's MIA. It's only November, though. So they're going to tell us. I mean, it is November 30th, so I don't know if he's upset about the calendar. I do think, though, that there are things this team's got to figure out and that they're just hadn't figured it out yet. Across the board here, we've got Hope Coogs grow up fast for conference play. Still got another month for conference play, right? We got time to figure things out. And yeah, as I look at this, I think that's one thing that is, if you get Mercy on the floor to score more, Mercy will score, right? For whatever he bleeds on defense and those kinds of things. And I think he does bleed on defense a little bit, but for whatever he does on defense, I think he's the kind of kid too. We've seen, like, when they talked to him about it, he went out and got some rebounds and stuff like that. Ultimately, that you just need the points too bad. They can't go 4 and 5 minutes against elite teams without scoring. I know San Diego State is not ranked presently, but they will be, not just because of this weekend for them, but also because, their losses are to Oregon and Gonzaga. Gonzaga is a top 5 team in America, right? And Gonzaga and Oregon, I think, is going to surprise some people here in about a month in Big Ten play. And so I think that you're going to see San Diego State, those losses age pretty well for them. And then Houston's going to fall out of the top 10. And, that's just where they are presently. The rankings are present tense kind of thing. Back when Houston was running for the number 1 spot in America, Sampson, you say you rent that thing and then you pass it on to the next person when it's their turn. Honestly, this feels kind of in the same vein. That's the way that goes. I've gone on and on for a second, and I want to talk more about where this team goes from here. While I've got people still here listening before we get into the football game, this might bleed some into the football game, though, because I think that technically kicks off in like 5 minutes. And I got a lot more than 5 minutes left to say about this basketball program. But before we get too far into that, remind you that today's game is brought to you by Game Time, the best place to get last tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. Looking for tickets to a Houston Cougar basketball game as they turn this thing around later this year. Go to Game Time right now. They got all kinds of tickets to concerts, games, comedy shows, theater, anything you could get tickets to in and around the H or wherever you are. They got tickets at Game Time. Lowest price guarantee means they can find you. If you can find a ticket in the same rowing section for less somewhere else, they will credit you back 110% of the difference. So take guesswork out of buying tickets at Game Time. Download the Game Time app today and create an account using code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply again. Create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEG for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. Parker Ainsworth, Locked On Coogs. You're trying to make sense of Houston falling for the third time in the last 6 games, 73-70. And I want to end this show by asking the question, kind of talking through where I think Houston goes from here, because we got to be honest, Houston has not lost 3 out of the 6 games in a long, long time. It's kind of uncomfortable, kind of feels almost new, and things don't get a whole heck of a lot easier when they go see Butler, when they host Butler. Is that just next weekend on the 7th? I think that's next weekend. After that Butler game, I think we'll see what Houston does the week to respond, right? We hopefully get Terrance a little bit healthier. We kind of see what Houston works out as far as finding more backup point guard options. We hopefully clean up some stuff with Milos. They then go through the month of December where they play Troy, they play Toledo, and they play Corpus Christi or A&M Corpus Christi or whoever that is, right? They don't play a I would say, tough game between Butler and Oklahoma State on the 30th. Right. And then truthfully, the tough game is probably really the one after that where they have to host BYU on January 4th. I say all of that to say that this is going to be about a month of serious growth. Not a lot of games, frankly, only a couple of tough games. Houston's got to find who they are in this stretch. Right. As CA37 points out, they've had games like this before. They had a bunch of close wins last year, but Jamal Shed was there to close it out for them. They don't have him as their closer. I think Coach Sampson referred to him the other day as like Mariano Rivera. Okay. They don't have that option. So what are they going to do in those moments? Is it playing mercy for extended minutes like we talked about a second ago? Is it finding ways to get Emanuel Sharp downhill? I kind of like the action with him for isolation there at the end of regulation. Is it spacing Terrance's minutes out differently and having him be the guy at the end? Is it something else? Whatever the deal is, they've got about a month till real serious basketball starts. They got to figure this thing out. And honestly, I would argue that a couple of losses to this point might actually benefit this team. Now, I don't know that I would have taken all 3 on the chin quite like that. I'd like to win a couple of those, obviously. But I'd say the stretch of last year where they grew the absolute most was after they lost to Iowa State and TCU and opened up without a road win for the first week or two in Big 12 play. And we were like, okay, wait a second. This conference is different. This level of basketball is different. What are we trying to do here, right? So now we kind of fast forward that we get a difficult non-conference slate and we lose to some good teams in Vegas. We lose to Auburn, who will probably be the number 1 team in America at some point this season, right? What do we do to bounce back? Where do we go from here? How do we get these things rolling? Now, does that mean that we have to run some sort of a different offense outside of the floppy set leading to isolation actions? It's a very pro-based set that Sampson's run since basically Marcus showed up when he had Marcus and Quentin Grimes on the floor at the same time. You might need to. You don't have the same guys. Do you need to run something that involves getting, you don't need a true point guard. You go through whether it's Arceneaux or Roberts or somebody at the high post as more of an operator. Maybe you kind of shift things into more of that, right? We saw a little bit of that when Jarris was there, but not a whole lot, right? Where do we see this team go? What I will say, though, and I was actually just texting back and forth. I don't think he minds me saying his name here, but with Mitchell, a guy I listen to the show a lot, he he and I were going back and forth, and he asked questions I think that are very valuable. Like, why do we only play 7 guys? Sampson only went with 7 for any serious minutes yet tonight. I think if you ask him in a honest moment later tonight or tomorrow morning, he'd call that a mistake. I don't have an answer for that. I think you're going to see guys earn more minutes over the course of the next month because they've shown that can't be how this team functions, right? It hasn't worked. People ask, like, where's Mercy? I think you're going to see more of a role for Mercy over the course of the next month, the same way Jojo Tugler came on in a bigger role in conference play last year, right? I think you're going to see those kinds of things shift because they have to. I would also point out, though, as I pointed out to Mitchell, and as I think some people are alluding to here in the comments, that Houston has had much smoother non-conference paths the last couple of seasons, right? And frankly, Houston spent stretches of the year ranked number 1 in America around December. I think it's each of the last 3 years. Am I wrong? Each of the last 3 years. And also, Houston has shown up battered, bruised, and injured and run out of gas in March. And Houston has fallen short in the Sweet 16 in March several years in a row. The goal is not to be playing your best basketball in November. The goal is not to be playing your best basketball in December. The goal is to be playing your best basketball come March and hopefully early April. This team's got holes. It does. This team is not last year's team. It is not the year before's team. It's not the year before that's team. But these Houston Cougars do have a lot of potential. They have a lot of talent. And frankly, they still have the exact same coaching staff working, developing, etc. Right? And so as I look at this team, as I look at where they're going to go, right, I think you're going to look at these 3 losses by the time we get to February, and they're going toe-to-toe with, I don't know, what's that stretch from February? They host Baylor, at Arizona State, host Iowa State. I mean, that's a tough stretch. I don't mean to say or excuse anything that's happening right now because truthfully, it looked bad several times in the last 2 weeks. But I am going to say that that's not the point. It's not to look good right now. If they look good right now, we'd be scratching our heads like, okay, where do we get better at? How do we fix this? People would figure us out. We get to mid-February, like, holy crap, what are we doing now, right? I think that the things you'll see fixed are you'll see a deeper rotation in January after the way things go in the next month. I think you'll see a little bit different roles, and I think you'll see more mercy by the time you get there as well. Last year we saw – the last couple of years, we've seen a lot more freshman trust come January, February than you see in November, December. Something that they earn over the course of that, typically from Sampson. And ultimately, right, you see the way that these guards go, and you'll see someone kind of take control. I think everyone's assuming that, point guard to point guard, it would be Milos. I think at a national level, outside of the Houston bubble, people kind of assumed it's going to be Crier because it was going to go from all everything score to all everything score, right? It might be Emanuel. It might be by position. It might be Terrance. It might be Mercy. But someone's going to get more take over there as well. And we got a lot to talk about with this team, and we got a long season ahead of us. But I will say that if the worst thing you can say about this team right now is like they're not quite number 1 team in America in December like they have been the last 3 years, I don't think that's a horrible thing to have to say right now. They're replacing the best player in college basketball last year. They're figuring out this year's story and narrative and where they're going to go with things. And truthfully, in a big picture perspective, I think there are fixes. Do I think it's a more uphill challenge than it was last year? Yes. Do I think last year's thing to me was just staying healthy and they couldn't do it, right? Do I think it's a more uphill challenge than the year before? Honestly, yes. Right, they got to go through the Big 12 gauntlet, whereas the year before was the American Athletic Conference, right? This year's team has a lot of hurdles in their way. They have a lot of improvements to get done in December and January and February to have a successful March. I don't think it's out of reach, and I don't think it's crazy to be in that boat right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go probably crack a cold one. We're not sponsored by any cold ones, so I'm not going to tell you what I'm drinking. I'm going to watch Houston BYU in the football game, kind of cheer them on for the last game of the season. I'm going to come right back here and talk to you about how that game goes. And then we're going to spend the next week between now and Butler next weekend talking about basketball, talking about football and the OC search. I'm sure there'll be 1,000 players in the portal by Monday. and all that as well. We're doing it here each and every day at Locked On Cougs. Locked On Cougs, the primary Locked On podcast network. That means your team every day. Go Cougs.